I mean, you can go deep on this subject of messaging and the power of government's voice to persuade people towards whatever it is that they're trying to convince you of. But for me, the food one was really interesting. And I always noticed that anyone who had an approach to food in the way that you said, like quite a natural approach, in the sense of, hey, it's what we've been doing for tens of thousands of years, is just labeled a hippie and it's the end of conversation. So what was it like through the 80s? Like, I can imagine there's a lot that I've probably thrown at you there that you've got plenty to comment on. But in the 80s, the response to what it was that you were coming out with, I'm sure you've been called a hippie more than once.
Oh, I've been called more than a hippie, I can tell you. I started,
Me too.
yeah, I did nutrition. I practiced as a nutritionist right up until 1989. And then I had my first child and we moved to Queensland. And I didn't have a practice and I felt like I wanted to do something with the knowledge I had. So I started writing for the local paper. And I was the weekly columnist in the local paper for 2 years. The letters to the editor were incredible. They were either very supportive or I'm an idiot, I'm a charlatan, you have no idea what you're talking about. I'll never forget when I wrote the article on margarine. So this is like 1990, maybe the beginning of 1991. I wrote an article on margarine and how bad it was and we should go back to butter. And back then, saturated fat was bad and polyunsaturated fats are good. And what blows me away at the moment is people still think that. And yet it's been debunked over and over and over again. So I did this article on margarine. Anyway, the Margarine Association of Australia contacted the paper and said that they wanted a retraction from what I'd said about margarine. And I just said to the paper, no, I'm not retracting it. I've got all the science. And margarine knows I have the science. So what they ended up doing to the paper is they said, we won't sue as long as you do a 1-page spread on the benefits of margarine, which they did. That was the Sunshine Coast Daily. Then the last article I wrote was on artificial sweeteners. And my editor rings me and he says, Cyndi, I can't. And these are the days when I typed it up and faxed it in. I want your audience to understand this. This is typing up, faxing in. And he rings me and he goes, I can't print this. And I said, why can't you print it? And he said, well, I'll get sued by probably Coca-Cola or, because of the diet sweeteners. And I said to him, you know what, I've been writing for you for 2 years. And if you're not prepared to tell the truth and you don't have the guts basically to tell the truth, then I don't want to be on your payroll anymore. And so I quit after 2 years I did 100 articles. And at the end of those 100 articles, I went, there's a book in this. And that's when I wrote my book, Changing Habits, Changing Lives. But it was the letters to the editors that were very telling as to, like, there were medical doctors that would write in and saying, margarine, you shouldn't be debunking this, and saturated fat's bad. And I just thought, how much nutrition have you had? All you've got is propaganda. And that's basically all humanity seems to have on diet is propaganda by the food companies or by I'm in the middle of I'm only just starting this book, but I've listened to a couple of his interviews, and it's called Fiat Food. And it's all about the fiat currency and inflation and why the foods that we eat today, which are cheap and nasty and part of a agricultural revolution that is killing people, as opposed to our meat and eggs and, the foods that we used to eat. But yeah, the more I dig into food, the more I realize that we have to make a stand about the food that we consume, because we are all powerful when we make a stand about the food that we consume, because we are telling the market that we're not standing for your additives and your flavors and your colorings and your glyphosate that you're spraying on those grains that you're telling me to eat 11 serves of. But rather we're telling our local farmer that we're really happy with their eggs and their meat and their fruits and their vegetables and nuts and whatever else is available in your local area. So I'm all for making a stand in this world, and food is my stand. And
Yeah.
I hope I can get as many people on board, because the more people we have on board, I think the more we are going to help our local community, number one, and then, or ourselves, our health, but then the planet. So I've got a bit of an altruistic view on the food that I consume, but it's all based on vitalism and historical perspective.